I welcome everyone to our program this afternoon featuring Michael Oren. I'm going to begin at this time as Michael is going to be joining us shortly. He's just trying to get in the link, and hopefully everything will work smoothly. Obviously, we're working under the pressure of time and just put this together very quickly. Ambassador Oren was kind enough to join us. He's been giving briefings throughout the day to international press and other audiences as well, and we're extremely pleased that he can be with us. I'm going to keep the introduction very, very short. Michael Oren, as known to all of us as a diplomat, having served as Israel's ambassador to the United States, and as a scholar, as someone who has written extensively about the Six-Day War, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and other matters as well. We are here out of concern, out of solidarity, and in a desire and quest to learn more. We have rabbis on the call, as well, a number of rabbis on the call, as well as other members of our various congregations. Over the last 24 hours, or a little bit longer, there have been over 1,000 rockets that have been fired into Israel from Gaza by Hamas and other militant terrorist groups. At the same time, there are things that are happening in Israel's cities as well, in which Jews are under attack in a way in which has never happened before. As Michael is logging in right now, we've just opened up to be able to take more. Let me just mention that today's call and conference is being sponsored by the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, a growing coalition of over 100 rabbis who are committed to concepts of Jewish peoplehood and to support for the self-determination of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. As such, we welcome you to go to our website, zionistrabbis.org. Please, if you are a rabbi and would like to join, please do so. Take a look at our statement and mission and purpose. And those of you who are not yet members or are not rabbis, we invite you to support the organization as well by going to zionistrabbis.org. Let me see.
Michael with us.
Come on.
Okay, wonderful, Michael. Thank you. Alicia, I've already introduced you, Michael, so let's go straight to hearing from you. Thank you so much. I know this is such a crazy time.
It is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your being with us, as do all the people who are here. Let me just start off with the basic questions. What's the latest of what's going on? And then I'm going to ask you, how did we get here?
Okay, we are now braced for a very difficult evening tonight. It's my estimate, but it's not only my estimate, that tonight may be the most intense evening for several reasons. The IDF eliminated 6 senior Hamas commanders today, and Hamas will not, take that quietly. In addition, Hamas is basically winning. I was on the Israeli news earlier today, and I said if I was running a scoreboard, I would have given it Hamas 50, Israel nothing. Hamas won the battle for Al-Aqsa. Hamas won the battle for the Temple Mount. Hamas won the battle for the Damascus Gate. Hamas won the battle by firing rockets at Jerusalem, and rockets that we did not anticipate, and though we did not intercept in time for the most part. And Hamas has inflicted serious barrages. They know how to overwhelm Iron Dome. Now, Iron Dome, can handle barrages of a certain extent, but if they are overwhelmed with 20, 30, 40 rockets coming at the same time, then the success rate of Iron Dome could go down from, say, 93% to 89%. But that's a very big difference, because for every 100 rockets, that means more than one is getting through. And in the city of the side of Tel Aviv, if you're being shot at by hundreds of rockets, 20, 30 rockets getting through is a lot of rockets. From where I'm sitting right here, I could see the barrages landing on southern Tel Aviv. I'm in southern Tel Aviv. I saw the bus being hit in Cholon. It burnt for a long time. So that has a tremendous psychological effect in Israel. But beyond that, it has a tremendous political benefit for Hamas. That's a victory image. My guess is they'll be looking to avenge today's liquidations. They'll be looking for a victory image. A victory image would be rockets setting us alight, for example, a gas station. That'd be perfect for Hamas. And they want to go out, and I'm not making a bad joke. They do want to go out with that bang, and then they'll immediately sue for a ceasefire. The Israeli cabinet met this evening. I'm sure that they voted a significant escalation in our response. The Israeli Air Force has been operating around the clock, hitting hundreds and hundreds of targets. And so far keeping casualty rates on the Palestinian side relatively light. And I mean relative to 2014 and 2008, when not several dozens, but hundreds and ultimately thousands of Palestinian civilians were killed. Hamas also does not have the benefit of an immense press presence in Gaza. The events unfolded so fast for Hamas that they actually didn't have time for the entire international press corps to converge on Gaza. And we have to understand something, that when we look at the situation, we can't look at it with Western eyes or Israeli eyes. We have to do it through Hamas's eyes. And for Hamas, this is not about Israel. It's really about who controls the West Bank and Jerusalem, who leads the Palestinians, who takes over the PLO. That's their immediate goals. And secondarily, how much money can they extort from Israel and the international community by destabilizing the Middle East? There's many things in it for Hamas, but for them, keep in mind that a significant amount of destruction wrought by Israel in Gaza is in their interest. And here we're up against this horrible dilemma of the Iron Dome being a double-edged sword. And I'm talking as the person who helped bring Iron Dome into Israel, and I'm very proud of it. But the fact of the matter is, Iron Dome is one of the great assets in Hamas's arsenal, because it creates disproportionality. Whereas on our side, we're going to have relatively few casualties, relatively few. On their side, they're going to have much higher casualties. Not only do they not have Iron Dome, they don't have a single air raid shelter, they don't have a single siren. They don't invest in them on purpose because they want to have Israel's image tarnished in the international press. That immediately translates into diplomatic pressure onto Israel. I always say that Hamas doesn't have a military strategy; it has a military tactic that serves a press, a diplomatic, and ultimately a legal strategy. It's designed to delegitimize us. It's designed to get us hauled before the International Court in The Hague. It's designed to have our right to self-determination, self-defense impugned, and certainly our right to self-determination erased, eradicated. So that's their goal, and they're very, very good at it. But they don't have the press this time. It's very difficult to do that without a massive international press presence. That's not in Gaza right now. So Hamas hasn't actually an interest now in calling it quits. It's maybe it's a bad metaphor, but they play some good bets on the table, and they want to get away from the table before they lose their hard-earned gains, or in this case, their earned gains, their ill-earned gains. Israel will have to make that decision. Our decision makers will have to make a decision whether we want to keep on pressing them, punishing them, reaching a point where Hamas can't say that this has been an unequivocal victory. That would be very bad for Israel's deterrence. Ultimately, the big loser is Abu Mazen, but I don't think anybody cares much about him anymore. It really has to do with our deterrence and the way other actors in the region are looking at it like this, particularly Hezbollah and Iran, and how we react. So tonight's going to be a hot night. Embrace yourself for it. How did we get here? One of the most difficult aspects of explaining, in the the Hasbara sense, of explaining this round of fighting with Hamas is because the sources are so murky and so multifarious and complex. It begins with the Sheikh Jarrah issue, which in itself could take you an hour to explain. Why Israel arrogates the right to reclaim Jewish land that was taken from its Jewish owners in the War of Independence. Why Palestinians don't have a reciprocal right for our property left in Israel. If you want to ask me about that, I can go into it. Why the Israeli courts ruled the way they did, that these families had to be expelled from their houses. Why the Israeli police had to go into the Temple Mount, into Al-Aqsa Mosque, apparently firing rubber bullets and tear gas. Why that had to be done. But in addition, there is the Israeli political morass, in the sense, I think, among Hamas decision makers, that Israel is in disarray in terms of its decision making, and it makes us an easier target. I think it also, the principal reason is the Palestinian elections, is the fact that Abu Mazen once again delayed elections, going into his 16th year of his 4-year term, keeping Hamas out of power. Hamas wasn't going to take it lying down anymore, and says, okay, if you're not going to give us power, through democratic means, we're going to take it by other means. And they've proven very, very adept at that, I must say.
There are aspects of this which are obviously an internal political issue, which are very difficult for us Westerners and outsiders to understand. This feels so different than other conflicts Israel's had. Perhaps because so far you've focused on the Hamas rocket attacks and everything, but there are also things that are happening in the cities of Israel, such as in Lod. Could you comment on that a little bit as well, please, Michael?
Yeah, this is extremely painful. This takes us back to October of 2000. It's a sense of deja vu. October 2000, the outbreak of the Second Intifada, following immediately on the heels of Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton's offer of a Palestinian state, the ZRC, which was rejected with flagrant violence, was a deeply traumatic event for the Israeli left. The Israeli left, which had long proceeded on the assumption that our conflict with the Palestinians was about the results of the 1967 war. It turns out it wasn't. It's about the results of the 1948 war. And the Israeli left has never recovered from October 2000. For those of us who still cared about coexistence, I would count myself among them, this has been very traumatic because Israeli Arabs have made immense progress in recent years, socially, economically. They are more socially upwardly mobile per capita than Israeli Jews. Israeli Christian Arabs are per capita more affluent and better educated than Israeli Jews. And then the elections of 2021, which from my perspective was the most revolutionary elections we've had since 1977, since Begin overthrew the Labor Party. Because in 2021, the 21% of our population, the Arab population, suddenly stood up and said, hey, we're part of your game, you're part of your system. And not only are we part of the system, we're actually going to determine the future of that system. And it was, to me, a very, very positive development. And then within 24 hours, it all came crashing down. In the pogrom in Lod, in other cities around the country, they burnt down Uri Buri in Akko. Those of you, Uri Buri was a shrine to coexistence and to great food, but to shrine to coexistence. And I think it may be sort of the coup de grace to the Israeli left. What's left of it, really. It's hard to say that after all of this progress was made, that it would be thrown out. Now that has had the Israeli Arab political response to Hamas has thrown the Israeli political system into total disarray. My family calling from Los Angeles. Sorry, I'm okay.
So they can join our call.
Because we were, the anti-Bibi camp was about to put together a coalition with Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett and Yvette Lieberman and Gidon Saar. And the key to all of this, the keystone, was the Islamic Party, Ram, and perhaps also some support from the Joint List. Once Ram came out in support of Hamas here, that was the end of that. And there's no way that I don't know if any Israeli party could have done it, but certainly not Naftali Bennett, the Amina Party, and certainly not the New Hope of Gidon Saar. Are
the Israeli politicians, especially we've got Gantz, you've got Bibi, et cetera, and getting along and with Bennett as well during this time of crisis? How's that happening?
Not so great. Bennett came out with a big speech against Bibi this morning, and it happens. Ever since in 2014, when the foreign minister Yvette Lieberman came out and gave us press conference against his own government, that kind of restraint we haven't seen. That's that set of unity. It's no, this crisis is catching us at a time of profound disunity in the Israeli political echelon. And I think that's going to impact some of the decision-making ability of this government, because it has to take into consideration that it doesn't have full sort of plenipotentiary legitimacy. It's not elected. And that's got to impact. It's got to weigh high. It should weigh heavily on decision makers.
I hate to talk about politics because there's so many more important issues here, but how does it?
Politics are very important here. They are key here.
Because there's the anti-Bibi coalition, or anyone but Bibi, and then there's Bibi trying to put things together. Will this change? You've obviously referred to the fact that the Arab parties now going to be they can't be trusted to turn to. How's it going to play out with the Israeli parties? Is there a possibility that Netanyahu will be able to put together a coalition now?
Possibly. Not after Bennett's speech this morning, but and it depends on how he plays this out.
Okay.
It's almost like a no-win situation for Netanyahu. If he escalates and Israel ends up going into Gaza, for example, in a ground operation, hundreds of Israeli soldiers are killed, and the outcome of that, the benefits of that type of operation, are going to be questionable at best. We're going to end up reoccupying Gaza, and he'll be faulted for that. But if he doesn't go into Gaza and we cut a ceasefire very quickly and we give some more Qatari money to the Hamas in big suitcases, as we've been doing, then he's going to be faulted for that as well. It is not a win-win situation. Think of the Book of Jonah. Okay, this is classic Book of Jonah time, and it's going to be very, very difficult. My guess is we'll go to a 5th round of elections, and which in a way is a win for Bibi because I always say that Hamas always wins by not losing, but Bibi also wins by not losing.
And so in terms of the rockets that are falling right now, in terms of the aspect of it, how are Israelis dealing with the situation on the ground? They're being, the rockets are falling. And then, as we said, also in cities themselves, Israelis are feeling threatened and in a way that they have not felt before.
No, I think listen, for those of us, excuse me, I have to sneeze, I think. Hold it.
Yeah.
That's, no sleep will do that for you. Yeah, Stuart, you've seen in worse situations. It's for those of us who have lived through this so many times, it's like, oh, rockets. And we're a little bit emotionally numbed to it. For people who have not experienced, and I have a lot of friends who are Olim Chadashim, visiting students, the thought that somebody, 40 miles away is aiming a rocket that could tear your body completely apart, aiming at you to kill you, and you can actually see them, that can be very maddening and very unnerving. And I'm talking to people who are on the verge of coming apart. This entire big swaths of this country suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome, particularly among the children. And it plays itself out in different ways. But, for me, it could be raining.
I want to ask you in a moment about messages you would give to the government and the administration. Before I do that, though, how about for American Jews? How about in terms of American rabbis? You and I have talked extensively about these issues in the past. What would you hope to see? And what about rabbis who align with progressive wings and so on and so forth and feel they have a responsibility to speak out in ways that perhaps are not necessarily always helpful or supportive to Israel? What are the messages? What would be helpful? What would be supportive for American Jews, American rabbis, etc.?
Several messages would be, one is, we may have political differences, but when millions of Jews and their families and their children are under murderous rocket fire, you put those differences aside. No political argument, whether over the status of a couple of houses in Sheikh Jarrah, or even a protest on the Temple Mount, nothing justifies an attempted mass murder, which is what this is. It's an attempted mass murder by a genocidal organization, period. Put your political differences aside until the smoke clears. That'd be one. Two, be humble. For those of us who are in this, for those of us who have spent our lives analyzing and studying the situation, it is a heavy lift. This is immensely complex. I'm humbled by the situation. Those of you who don't know fluent Hebrew, don't know fluent Arabic, don't know the history, do not jump to conclusions about anything. Be humble. Be humble as someone who doesn't live in the United States would be humble, commenting about, constitutional crises in the United States. Express empathy. You can express empathy for the Palestinians certainly as well. And there are innocent Palestinians who are suffering tonight, though I would strongly suggest that their suffering is not caused by the state of Israel. It's caused by the people who are using them as human shield.
Michael, what's the sense that you've touched upon in terms of the Israeli Arab Party, the Ra'am, but what about Israeli Arab mayors and others? Are there any voices that are being raised in the among Israeli Arab community to try and quell the situation a little bit? And what about our newfound Arab allies as well?
Okay, so among the Israeli Arab population, yes, there have been some voices, but they haven't been widely covered, and they've been largely muted. I think they're not self-muted. I think they're muted by the media. Among our newfound Arab allies, as long as the issue was Jerusalem and only Jerusalem, they had to come out publicly on the side of Hamas. The image of Israeli policemen up on the Temple Mount firing tear gas in Al-Aqsa, that could not but elicit a highly critical response from the Gulf states, Morocco, and Sudan. And we had to understand this. We had to understand that. And I myself do not understand all of the circumstances that led to that police raid. I don't. But once Hamas fired the first rocket at Israel, not in Jerusalem, then those countries are going to stand with us and not with Hamas, because then they know it's not about Jerusalem. I mean, first of all, how do you defend Jerusalem by shooting rockets at it? That's one. But then how do you defend Jerusalem by shooting rockets at Ashkelon or Ashdod or Tel Aviv? And it's not as if these Arab governments like Hamas. They detest Hamas. They're not even particularly keen on the Palestinians. So I'm less concerned about the future of the Abraham Accords.
So going back to what you said at the outset there, in terms of how is this, help us understand, because many people don't quite get that it's an internal Arab conflict between the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas and the postponed elections and the, if you want to throw in the Sheikh Jarrah, which you alluded to briefly as well, but and finally the incitement that takes place on in the mosques throughout the country at a time like this.
You know, it's a good time to plug my own book about the Six-Day War. You read that book and you realize that there's nothing really new in the Middle East. The Six-Day War broke out because Arab leaders were trying to prove to their streets that they were the most Arab nationalists, the most patriotic. And so how do you do that? You attack Israel. And then you blame another guy. So what happened here? Hamas is in deadly competition with Al-Fatah and the PLO. And how do you prove you're more Palestinian than the PLO? You attack Israel. Nothing's changed here. And Hamas has the added benefit of also being the victim of Israel when we respond. And it has the added benefit of getting the international community on its side and condemning Israel and delegitimizing Israel. Hamas has a lot of benefits. It is a very jiu-jitsu-like type of situation. I hope I'm not making a bad joke. It's jiu-jitsu. They're using our vastly superior strength against us. Amazing.
So you were Israel's ambassador to the United States. If you were here now, and you could actually speak more freely with us probably because you're not ambassador currently, what would you be telling the President Biden? What would you be telling Secretary of State Blinken? What are the messages, both that would be publicly expressed and perhaps behind the scenes? Help us understand a little bit what you would want them to understand and what would you want them to say and do at this time? And then finally, how do you feel about what's been said and done so far from the Americans?
I think that I would say to them, don't shy away from moral equivalency. Do not call on both sides to de-escalate. Because that's absurd. Hamas is literally firing rockets in an act of mass murder. We are defending ourselves. The minute you talk on both sides to escalate, you've created a moral equivalency, and you've also granted Hamas a victory. Look, we've got the United States to put us on the same level of Israel, and we're getting away with this. We're literally getting away with murder. So I would shy away from that. I know politically it's probably very difficult for this administration, but that's what I would recommend. And I would reiterate, as the State Department spokesman did today, reiterate that America stands foursquare with Israel and defends its right to defend itself. That's very important. But block efforts in the Security Council, do all the things that the administration is due, but do not call on both sides to ease tensions.
So based on what you've heard so far, how are you feeling about the, what grade would you give the Biden administration, both on this now, and then there's some who have written articles saying that conceivably some of the steps taken by the Biden administration may have in some way tacitly encouraged or given a wink and a nod, a signal of some sort. Do you want to comment on that, Michael, or is that too hard?
A wink and a nod to who? I've heard the Palestinians say they've given a wink and a nod to Israel, and I've heard Israelis saying they've given a wink and a nod to the Palestinians.
We re-entered the UNRWA. We also, the United States also has given money to the Palestinian Authority and has also taken the Houthis off of the terrorist list. In other words, all of those things that have happened recently. Is that in any way contributing to the current situation?
No, because other than signaling that the United States is willing once again to return to the policy of rewarding the Palestinians for leaving the table. Which has been a cardinal error in American foreign policy that has been endemic to both parties and almost every administration. They leave the table, they get paid. So why would they ever come to the table? But the broader message is if you are more militant, if you're more rejectionist, you're going to get rewarded. And it's a bad precedent. I'm saying this not as a leftist, as a rightist. I actually want to get to a peace arrangement. I'm one of those rare Israelis who still believe that we should negotiate on the basis of dual sovereignty, but you're never going to get there this way. By renewing aid to UNRWA was the worst possible thing you could have done for the Palestinians. But I'm in this long enough, Stuart, to know that it's not about the Palestinians; it's about America, and it's what Americans makes them feel good or makes them satisfy some kind of political exigency. But it's not about the Middle East and actually seeing what is actually happening here. And to understand that when you call on both sides to de-escalate, you're actually doing the Palestinians an immense disservice because you're prolonging the violence and you're prolonging the ability of Hamas to keep firing and using their own people as human shields. But I can say this, it's not going to change anything. I understand that. And so you asked me about giving grades to the Biden administration. I'd give them, given, the legacy that they inherited, given the party they represent, I would give them high grades.
So well, when you were here in Washington as Israel's ambassador, there were not members of the Democratic Party in Congress who are there now, who are expressing the kinds of things there are. People such as Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. And obviously that's a difficult problem internally for the Democratic Party. But, what do you think, any thoughts or responses about what's happening in that regard and how to respond to it and so on?
10 years ago, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was much smaller and much weaker than it is today. And the degree that it existed 10 years ago, that progressive wing was kind of afraid of Barack Obama. It wouldn't take him on. Today, the progressive wing is the dominant wing in many ways. It very strong, very dynamic, and it is not afraid of this administration. And they will make their positions known. That's why I say, given the political realities in which the administration finds itself, I'd give high grades. I was surprised by some of the statements that came out in the last 40 hours. I really was. I was expecting harsher responses. It's going to change, though. It's going to change as the number of Palestinian casualties rise, if it continues to rise. And it'll change if Israel goes on a broader offensive. We are on the offensive. We're on a very intensive offensive, but we keep it very low key. So you haven't had the pictures of Israeli tanks and ground soldiers moving into Gaza. My own opinion, during 2014, that, a Democratic administration would support Israel and its right to defend itself as long as Israel did not exercise that right on the offensive. As we were perfectly fine firing, sort of Iron Dome, but once we actually went into the alleys of Gaza with tanks and street forces, that was going to change very fast.
So in terms of what to expect vis-a-vis public opinion, what is your sense? Are you hearing anything from the European Union as well on what's happening right now?
Yeah, there's always going to be a nuance with the European Union, and there's going to be a greater sort of critical air in their responses toward Israel. At the end of the day, I'm the guy who cares about international opinion. I care about our standing in the world. It's what I've in many ways dedicated my life to. But at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do to defend ourselves. And if I have to choose between the safety of my children and grandchildren and a carping condemnation by the European Union, you know what I'm going to choose. Mm-hmm. So they got problems of their own. I think that the sources of concern for me tonight, besides just the safety of the people in Tel Aviv, and you'll probably be hearing the siren going off soon, is that it's the state of the political morass in Israel, the breakdown of Jewish Arab coexistence in so many places. I live in Jaffa, and I just drove through downtown Jaffa. It's all barricaded off. So the police are there in great presence, and they're obviously expecting some type of upheaval in Jaffa tonight.
Jaffa, of course,
we've been spared.
Jaffa being a mixed city, and so we've seen it.
Mixed city, yeah, and we've had violence in the past, but nothing like Lod. And I was shocked by the police presence in full battle gear, by the way. Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions, one of the issues that you mentioned before was in terms of what to expect tonight, and in part because of the fact that some of the top Hamas leaders have been taken out. What will it take, do you think, to Israel has never really, delivered a full victory, so to speak, in these issues. Do you think that's necessary or not? What will it take to get Hamas to stop what they're doing?
There's really no such thing as a military victory anymore. There's no how bite the Adenu anymore. It doesn't exist. And there's no what I call Mount Suribachi moments in military affairs today. So, chances are this will play out much the same way as previous rounds. Chances are, and I'll tell you where it could not, and that is that we'll keep on bloodying one another. We'll each claim a sort of victory. We'll wait for some type of international initiative to pressure us into a ceasefire. It'll be broken several times. Some will come along and throw a lot of money at Hamas. And as they say here, Shalom al Yisrael. And we'll go back to our 5th round of elections and recovering from Corona. and maybe investigating the Mount Meron disaster. I mean, we go from one crazy event to the next. We never recover. We're a little bit punch happy here. But this solves nothing. And ultimately, it will erode our deterrence, not against Hamas, but against other actors in the Middle East, say Hezbollah. They're taking very close notes. It'll erode our sense of national resilience, our chosen lumi. It is a fundamentally unhealthy situation.
Any possibility that Hamas that Hezbollah might join in on the party? Concerned about that?
Only if it gets. I think that Hezbollah doesn't want to. It's got its hands full with Hezbollah, with Lebanon. And keep in mind, our options with Lebanon are vastly greater because Lebanon is actually a country, and they have what to lose. And believe me, we'll take it from them. We will declare war against Lebanon, state to state.
And
this is different than bombing refugee camps.
And speaking of neighbors, what about Jordan and Egypt? What role are they playing at this point, if any?
Egypt will be a mediating. Egypt will be a mediating role.
And Jordan?
Jordan doesn't have the same type of stature, and Jordan's got its own problems right now. But they'll try to be helpful. They'll try to be helpful. Jordan has, is sitting on that powder keg there, majority Palestinian population. Hamas is very powerful in Jordan. It's legal in Jordan, and they have to tread very carefully. Our preferred mediator is always going to be Egypt, because they share our antipathy toward Hamas, to Islamic extremists, and they have every interest in keeping the lid on Gaza.
So, in terms of the morning after, so to speak, Israelis wake up, Palestinians wake up, Israeli Arabs wake up, and the dust has settled. It's going to be very, very different because of some of the things that are happening right now, vis-a-vis the nature of those coexistence and possibilities for relations and things like that. What would you say about that, Michael?
I would say that it's a huge step backwards. It's going to take a long time to repair some of this damage.
And
it's very tragic.
Voices right now.
It's deeply tragic. We've lived through many wars of this nature, but this is unique. They burnt 3 synagogues within view of my window here. 3 synagogues in the Jewish state of Israel, the place where synagogues were not supposed to be burnt anymore. That is a trauma for the people of Israel, and it won't be forgotten very easily.
The synagogues that were burned were where, Michael?
In Lod.
In Lod. I had heard something that Sifrei Torah were being taken out of synagogues to protect them. Is that true?
Yeah, they're also strewn all over the place. Yes. Huh. So this is in our country. This is in our sovereign country, and Israelis are going to have zero tolerance for that type of intolerance. Zero. Well, and some will be trying to take the law in their own hands. And one of my fears, and I haven't articulated, is that there's going to be a violent reaction from the Israeli street, and we have to brace ourselves for that possibility. We're dealing with civil strife.
I think
and so needs to get out of hand.
One of my takeaways for our conversation is again to try and understand the complexity of what's happening, and number 2, the message that is so important is that Israel is responding to what's been going on and is not the initiator. I think that's something that is important. There's a question that was sent in the chat room here, which I just want to share with you. And that is, at the beginning, you said that it was 50-0, so to speak, that Hamas was clearly winning. What would it take for Israel to get score 51 points in the bottom quarter, so to speak?
We have to really take out a major chunk of Hamas leadership.
Is there the will to do that? Is there ability and the will, and those are 2 different things?
No, there's a will, definitely. The ability is circumscribed to the fact that the Hamas leadership hides under hospitals.
So that is obviously a problem in terms of what Israel's doing. But is there a sense of, we're just going to go after who we need to go after anyway on the part of Israel, or is there still a sense of making the complexity and difficulty of being able to take care of it in that fashion?
I don't know if I understood the question. They're just telling you, if we see that you could have the entire. It's actually it happened once before. The entire Hamas leadership was in one room, in one house, but it turned out there were kids in the next room. So we called off the operation, and that's going to happen again and again and again. We've got to find that that very special moment when Hamas leaders are not in the presence of civilians. But of course, they keep the civilians around them on purpose. This is an old, tactic. My son Yoav was
Sure.
shot twice in an operation against Hamas, against the Hamas operative who was hiding behind his own kids, literally shooting from behind them. So they do this, and it's shocking to Westerners, shocking to Israelis, frankly. But this is what they do, and it stretches. Western belief. This is the reality. Stuart, I'm going to have to get off. I got a whole evening of this.
I can
Catch
imagine.
me on
Well, Mike, I
CNN
would
tonight,
sort of-
Jake Tapper. Bunch of radio programs coming up.
Michael, thank you for your explanation and helping us to understand better the situation. Final takeaway to rabbis, to Jews in America is, in a couple of words, any last thoughts? Words?
But whatever political differences you have, different interpretations of the events surrounding this, put them aside. You've got
Thank you.
millions of your people are under rocket fire tonight. And every political difference should pale beside that. There'll be things to discuss when quiet is restored. But let's put things aside until then.
An important message. I appreciate
home.
it. Thank you so much. Pray for
Yeah.
the peace of Jerusalem. And we thank everyone for
Great.
joining this call, sponsored by the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, ZionistRabbis.org. Michael, thank you always for your friendship, for your
Thank you,
leadership.
guys.
Your
Always. Thank you, Stuart. Love you. All right. Bye. Thank you all. Bye.
Take care. And we will be sponsoring some other sessions as well. Those of you who are with us, please be sure to let us know, and we'll be sending out other information as well. In the meantime, thank you. And let us, as I said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Thank you.